All right, this is lesson 4.9, part 2. We're going to compare shift patterns with powers to 10. We did this back in lesson 1 in this unit, but we used whole numbers. We're going to be looking at it using decimals. So see what you recall about the shift patterns with powers of 10. Write down what you remember about powers of 10 and their shift patterns. Okay, so remember that powers of 10, we use, our base is the 10, 10 to the first power, raised to the first power, 10 to the second power, 10 to the third power, remember? So remember, 10 to the first power tells you have 1 10, so it's just worth 10. 10 to the second power means you have 2 tens, so it's 10 times 10, which is 100. 10 to the third power is the same thing as, tells you have 3 tens, so it's the same thing as 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. Does that sound familiar? All right, so let's look at this review. So this is back from the first lesson in this unit. Which way will the digits shift? Write as repeated multiplication, so 14 times 10, right? So you're multiplying by 10, 100, and 1,000. So is it going to get bigger or smaller? Right, bigger. So if it gets bigger, which way are they going to shift? Right, they're going to shift to the left, okay? So if I do that, the digits will shift to the left like we just said. 14 times 10 is the same. If I do repeated multiplication, it's still 14 times 10, right? Because it's just 110. And then 14 times 10 is 14 times 1, which is 14. Add my 0, it makes it 140. And it's shifted over from 14 to 140. It shifted over one space, went over one space in the place value chart. 14 times 100 is the same thing as 14 times 10 times 10, which is same thing as 14. And then I have 2 zeros. I'm going to add my 2 zeros. So it makes it 1,400. And that one shifted over 2 spaces, right? Because I have 2 tens. So it's going to shift over 2 places. 14 times 1,000 is the same thing as 14 times 10 times 10 times 10. So it's going to be 14, and I have how many zeros? 1, 2, 3. I have my 3 zeros. That's going to make it 14,000. And how many did it shift over? 3 spaces because I have 3 tens. So shifting over 3 place values, okay? So do you remember that? And remember, this 10 could be 10 to the first power. This one would be 14 times 10 to the second power, right? That's for that one. And then that one would be 14 times 10 to the third power because you have 3 tens, and in that one you have 2 tens. All right, ringing a bell from back from the first lesson. Okay, so now we're going to apply that to decimals, okay? So it's still the same thing. 10 to the first power is just 10. 10 to the second power is 10 times 10, which is 100. 10 to the third power is the same thing as 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. So 4 tenths times 10 is the same thing as 4 tenths times 10 to the first power. So if I were to do that, I just simply ignore the decimal, right? And what's 4 times 10, right? That's 40. But I have one decimal place. I got to add my one decimal place, and it becomes my 4. That's how it becomes my 4. All right, let's look at the next one. Let me erase that so I have room to write. Okay, the next one is 4 times 100, right? So ignore the decimal and just think of it as a 4. What's 4 times 10 times 10, right? Which would be 4 times 100 would be 400. And then I have one decimal place. I got to add my one decimal place. That gives it the 40 that's right there. And then I have 4 tenths, but I'm going to ignore the decimal. Just think of it as a 4. 4 times 1,000, right? 1,000 can be broken up into 1, 2, 3 tenths. So it'd be 4 with 1, 2, 3 zeros. 1, 2, 3 zeros. I have one decimal place, it becomes my 400. So it's the same thing. Because you're multiplying by powers of 10, notice that the number is getting bigger, right? Because you're shifting the number to the left. This one I shifted it one place, so it became a 4. This one I shifted it 2 places, so it became 40, and this one I shifted 3 places, so it became 400, okay? Because you're using powers of 10. Okay, let's look at this one. Which way will the digits shift? Right, as repeated multiplication also include powers of 10. All right, so it's the same thing. 8 tenths times 10, right? So that can be written using powers of 10 as 0.8 times 10. And how many tens do I have? 1, right? So it's to the first power, which is the same thing as 0.8 times 10, only 110, because I only have 110. I'm basically rewriting that equation again, right? Which is equal to, forget the decimal, ignore the decimal, and just think of it as 8. What's 8 times 10? 80. Good. How many decimal places? 1, 1. So how many places did it shift? 1 place, and it shifted to the left. So these are all going to shift to the left. And this one shifted 1 space. 1 space. Okay, let's look at the next one. Let me change my pen color. 8 tenths times 100 can be written as 0.8 times 10 to the second power, because I have 2 zeros, right? And if I do repeated addition, that's the same thing as 0.8 times 10 times 10. That's my repeated addition, right? Which is equal to, ignore the decimal, think of it as 8. 8 times 100 is 800, good. 800, and I have how many decimal places? 1, so I got to bring it over 1. So 8 tens times 100 becomes 80. And how many spaces did we shift? 2 spaces, correct. 2 spaces to the left. Okay, let's do the last one. Change my pen color again. So 8 tenths times 1,000, I'm going to write right below so I have more room. That's the same thing as 8 tenths times 10 to what power? How many zeros? 1, 2, 3 to the third power, right? Which is the same thing as 8 tenths times 10 times 10, and I have 3 of them, so another 10, which is the same thing as 8 tenths times 1,000, right? Ignore the decimal. What's 8 times 1,000? Good, 8,000. 8,000. I'm not going to put it in my comma because I'm going to have to put in a decimal. 1 decimal place, 1 decimal place, it becomes 800. And that one moved how many places? 3 spaces. Okay, so it's the exact same way that we did whole numbers. We just have to ignore the decimal like we normally do, multiply it out, and then just bring back the decimal. Okay, that's all we're doing. And notice that it's becoming bigger, right? This one became 10 times bigger, 100 times bigger, 1,000 times bigger. All right, ready to try some? Okay, try this one. Tell me which way the digits are going to shift. Write it as repeated multiplication like we did, and also include the powers of 10, just like we did in the last one. If you forgot, go back and rewind the tape and watch how I did it, and then try this one on your own, and then come back to me to see how you did. Okay, so hopefully you got 2.7 for the first one. So it should have been 0.27 times 10 to the power of 1. Then it should be 0.27 times 10, just 10 because there's only one 10, so you're basically rewriting that. And then I basically multiplied 27 times 10. So I wrote down 27, and I needed 1 0, so I added my 0, 1, 2 place value, so I had to shift it over 1, 2 places, so it became 2.7, 2 and 7 tenths. Then the next one, 27 times 27 hundredths times 100. So I rewrote it, but it's 10 to the power of 2 because there's two zeros. So it's the same thing as 0 and 27 hundredths times 10 times 10. So then I multiplied 27 times 100, and I got 2,700. But then I had to bring back my decimal. There's two place values, so I shifted it over 1, 2, and that gave me 27. And then for the last one, 0 and 27 hundredths times 10 to the third power, right? Because there's three zeros in 1,000. So that's the same thing as 0 and 27 hundredths times 10 times 10 times 10. That's repeated multiplication. Then I multiplied 27 times 1,000, and that gave me 27,000. But then I have 1, 2, 3. I needed to add my place my decimal back in, and there's two places. So I shifted over 1, 2, and that gave me 270. Okay, which way will the digits shift? Write it as repeated multiplication. So now all we're doing is writing as repeated multiplication. So which way are they going to shift? They're going to shift to the left or to the right. I'm using powers of 10. Good. If you said left, you are right. They're all going to shift to the left. And so 4.8, 10 to the power of 1 is the same thing as 4.8 times 10, because I only have one 10. Okay, let's go ahead and just solve this. So I'm going to ignore the decimals, just 48 times 10, or 48 times 1, which is 48. Add my 0. One place value shift, so one shift, so that gives me 48. Let's do the next one. So 48, 4.8 times 10 to the power 2 is the same thing as 4.8 times 10 times 10, because I have two 10s, because the exponent is a 2, straight to the second power, which is the same thing. I'm going to ignore the decimal, which is the same thing as 48 times 1, which is 48. And then I have two zeros, 1, 2. The exponent also tells me how many zeros, right? And I have one place value, so it gives me 480. So this one shifted over one space, this one shifted over two spaces. So this one went one space over because I have to the power of 1. This one did two spaces because it's to the power of 2, right? So can you guess how many spaces this one's going to do? You said 3, you're right, right? Because we have the power of 3. So this one's going to be the same thing as 4.8 times 10 times 10, and I have 3 of them, so I had to do one more. Oops, what happened to my 1 there? Times 10. So I'm going to ignore my decimal, it's just 48, right? Times the 1, which is 48. And I have how many zeros? 3. 1, 2, 3. Add 3 zeros. 1, 2, 3. How many places over? 1. Got to move it over 1. So it becomes 4,800. And this one moved over 3 spaces. It didn't ask me, but I'm just writing it just to show you. It didn't ask me how many spaces it moved, but I'm just showing you. Oh, there we go. 3 spaces, right? It shifted over 3 spaces. Okay, I had to fix that because my C didn't come out. All right, so you ready to try one? Okay, so you try this one. Which way will the digits shift? And write it as repeated multiplication. And go ahead and write down the answer too. It's good practice, okay? So go ahead and do that and then come back to me, see what you get. All right, so hopefully you got, for the first one here, you got 6.23 times 10, just 10 because you only have one 10. So it's just basically 6, ignore the decimal, 623, right, times 10, 6,230. Two decimal places, so 62 and 3/10. The next one, 10 to the second power, tells me I have two tens, so 6.23 times 10 times 10, because I have two of them, which is the same thing as 623. I'm going to ignore the decimal, 623 times 1, which is 623, and then I have two zeros, so I had my two zeros, two decimal places, 1, 2, it becomes 623. And notice they're all shifting to the which side? To the left, right? To the left. Oh, my pen stopped working. Okay. I'll write it up in just a minute. 6.23 times 10 to the third power tells me I have 10 times 10 times 10, tells me I have three tens, which is the same thing as 6.23 times 1,000, which is, ignore the decimal, 623 times 1,000, right? So I put my 623 and I added three zeros, 1, 2, 3, two shifts, 1, 2, it becomes 6,230, and that one had two shifts. I mean, the last one had three shifts. Okay, so I wrote it down. I paused it because my pen stopped working, and believe it or not, it's easier for me to write with the pen. It's harder for me to write with the mouse. It takes me way longer. So they shifted to the left. This one shifted over one place. This one shifted two places because I have two tens, and this one shifted over three places because I have three tens. Okay. All right. So go ahead and write down what you learned. Proof of learning by solving a problem. So make sure it's a decimal multiplied by a power of 10. Okay, so try a power of 2, power of 3, something like that, and then a reflection or question if you have one. And that's the end of this lesson. Have a great day.